So we're going to talk about languages, and then we're going to talk about religions. And this is something that students really struggle with a lot of the times. This part of the unit is what gets a lot of students, and they have a hard time grasping the concepts because a lot of times they're very new, and they also don't know how much they need to know. Because there's a lot we could talk about when we talk about languages and religion. There's a lot of religions of the world, and there's a lot of characteristics of these religions. So what I've done is I've tried to simplify it as much as possible. Just cover basically the bare minimum, what you need to know for this exam. And if I don't cover something, you really don't need to know it. It's not that important for the class. If you want to know more, that's great. It'll probably help your understanding of languages and religions, but this should get you by for the course and for the exam. So we're going to start with languages, and we're going to just start with some vocab, basic vocab terms that you need to be familiar with. So the first one here is a language family. So this is a largest grouping of related languages. So English, Dutch, Spanish, French are all part of this Indo-European language family because they share a common ancient origin. And we can see here, this is where Indo-European languages are commonly found or where they're originated from. And of course, this doesn't show the whole world. Indo-European languages are the most prominent languages around the world. We see them in Australia, we see them in Europe, we see them in South Asia, we see them in North and South America as well. They're the prominent families there. They're not the only language family though, but it is the biggest. Now, a language branch. This is a part of a language family. So a language family is made up of multiple language branches. So they are a subdivision that shares a more recent common ancestor. And something that makes me think of is evolution. When we talk about natural selection a lot in biology, we talk about common ancestors. And that's kind of like this as well. The Indo-European language family originated way before the Germanic language family or the Romance language branch. Language group. A collection of languages within a branch that we're getting smaller and a lot more specific. They share a relatively recent origin and display similar grammar and vocabulary. So we go language family, big concept. Language branch, more specific, smaller. Language group, which are found on branches, they are smaller, also more specific. That's where we see grammar and vocabulary start to become very alike. So the language branch we're looking at is the Germanic languages, and then the group we're talking about particularly is the West Germanic language, which has languages like English on them. And a language itself is the next term. It's an individual system of communication spoken by a group of people. So that would be English. It could be Dutch. It could be Spanish. It could be Mandarin or Hindi. It could be Swahili. There are so many different languages around the world. Now, something that's more specific within a language is a dialect, which is a regional or social variation of a language, distinguished by pronunciation, vocabulary, and grammar. So, for example, we could look at British versus American English as a dialect. There are different terms that British people use compared to Americans. Sometimes we write our words differently, like theater or color. And then we have an accent, which are variations in pronunciation within a language, often based on region or social identity. So when I think of Boston, I think of the Boston accent, or the South where we say y'all a lot. We have the Southern U.S. accent as well. We have the Australian English accent as well. And of course, we have the English accent in England where they say bottle of water. So these are all language vocab terms that you need to know, and just kind of be familiar with the definitions of these terms and maybe an example or two. And we're going to look at some more examples here coming up, but this should be the gist of it for our language vocabulary. So this is a Indo-European language tree. Language family, language tree, those are used synonymously in this course. And we can see here there are a lot of different languages in the Indo-European language family. I said it was really extensive. So we can see that Hindi, which is found, predominantly in India, that is an Indo-European language family, even though it's not found in Europe. We see English, German, we look at French, Italian, Portuguese, French, Spanish, those are all what's known as Romance languages. Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, Czech, Serbian, those are all Slavic languages. Welsh and Cornish are Celtic languages. We have our Germanic languages. That's our branch is the Germanic languages. So that would be like Swiss, German, English, Dutch, Flemish, Icelandic. And then we have the different language groups like High German or Anglo-Frisian or West Germanic, North Germanic, and so on. Our North Germanic languages would be like Icelandic or Norwegian or Danish or Swedish. And we can look at our Indo-Iranian, Indo-European groups and branches. So our Indo-Iranian's a branch here. And we have like the Eastern Zone, which is a group, which has languages like Bengali. And we can see here, there's a lot of other different language groups and language families here. You don't have to memorize this here, but it should be easy for you to read and understand. We're just going to practice that because they may give you a language group or branch or family, like the Indo-European family, on the AP exam. And this is the language family that College Board likes to talk about the most, so it's the one that you should be the most familiar with. Maybe you should know some examples of Romance languages and Germanic languages, just for the sake of knowing some good examples here, because that might help you answer questions a lot more easily on the AP exam here. So we can see here that the Indo-European language family is found everywhere throughout the world. It's found a lot as official languages in North and South America, Europe, and Asia, and Australia. And then a lot of times it's found as second official languages in Sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of Asia as well. Or it's just widely spoken in a lot of other countries, like in the Middle East or Northern Africa or Greenland as well. And the reason that Indo-European languages are so prominent is pretty much because of colonialism and trade. Colonialism, we had the Europeans go to Africa, North and South America, South Asia, Australia. They colonized those areas, particularly the British or the French or the Spanish or Portuguese. Those four countries are the ones we think of the most when we think of colonization. And they brought English or French or Dutch with them to these colonies. And of course, the European countries are a little more developed in the other parts of the world, particularly in historical times. So they're the ones that, where the Industrial Revolution started. So they're going to be exchanging resources and goods and trading a lot with other countries. And when they're doing these transactions and this business, they're going to be communicated in English or spread English and other cultural traits to wherever they're going or whoever they're interacting with here. So we can see here that there's a lot of English, a lot of French, a lot of Spanish, a lot of other Indo-European languages. I mean, look at how prominent this language family is. So we can see that throughout the world. Now let's look at some other language families. We're not going to go too into depth with these, but we look at the Austronesian language family here. So about 300 million people, I believe, speak the Austronesian language family. It's not as big as the Indo-European language family. That's the largest family. In terms of speakers and geographical spread, I don't know if I mentioned that. But the Austronesian language family originated in Taiwan, and it's spread across the Pacific, Southeast Asia, and parts of Madagascar. That's where it's found the most. And many languages in this family are known for their use of reduplication, which is where they repeat parts of words when they're speaking. And some languages in this family have a very big emphasis on vowel harmony when it comes to communication. I don't really know exactly what that is, but that's just something that I know is a prominent part of this language family here. And we can see here there's a lot of different languages in this language family, and a lot of them are a little more recognizable, like Fijian or Hawaiian or Malay, where they speak in Malaysia. We look at the different language branches here, like Malayo-Polynesian or Eastern Malayo-Polynesian, which is a language group here. I'm sure there are different dialects and accents for Hawaiian or Fijian or Tuvalu. I like saying Tuvalu. That's a cool language name. I really like that. So yeah, Austronesian. And we can see here where it's more prominently, so we see it in Southeast Asia, the Pacific area, all those little islands there. They speak different Austronesian languages, as well as Madagascar and parts of New Zealand as well. This is the Sino-Tibetan language family. This is the second largest language family by number of speakers. Has two major branches, Chinese and Tibeto-Burman. Here, many languages like Mandarin here, which is considered Chinese, are tonal, which means that the pitch or the tone used will affect the meaning of the words. And when they don't really have an alphabet system, they have more of a character system in these languages here. We can kind of see that here with this image here. I don't know which language this actually is from. I just put that there, but it is Sino-Tibetan. I know that for sure. There's some languages that you may recognize in here. I know Chinese is probably a little recognizable, but there's some languages spoken in Myanmar and Thailand and Vietnam. So Southeast Asia, Eastern Asia, particularly is where this language family is located here. So a lot of China, a little bit of Nepal, a little bit of Myanmar and Vietnam here. Not a lot of Southeast Asia. That was our more Austronesian language family. And then India here is Indo-European. Then we have the Niger-Congo language family here. So a lot of languages here that are found across Africa. It's the largest language family in Africa. There's over 1,500 languages, so this isn't the most extensive or exhaustive list here. It's mostly spoken in sub-Saharan Africa. They have tonal languages and something called noun classes, as well as rich systems of verbal morphology as well here. And so you can kind of recognize that there's probably a lot of languages that have this type of writing system here. It's kind of recognizable as the Niger-Congo language family if you look at different languages and if you study them as well. So you can see here, this is what language families found a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. There are a lot of different languages here. And for the most part, they're spoken in very distinct areas by very distinct cultural groups here. Swahili, right there on the right, is a very, very highly spoken language. It's the official language of multiple countries in East Africa, and it's commonly used as a lingua franca. We have the Afroasiatic language family. So this has, for the most part, languages like Egyptian, Arabic is one of the widely spoken languages. There's about 350 languages. Some of the oldest written languages are Afroasiatic. It's kind of similar to the Niger-Congo when how they write with their characters and vocabulary. Most languages in this family use trilateral roots where they have 3 consonants where different vowels and affixes are added to form words. And if you don't really understand that, I don't really understand it either. So it's not a big deal. I just thought it was cool to say. We see vowel harmony present in languages like Arabic as well, with a great emphasis on the vowel usage when they're speaking. There's rich verb systems that can indicate tense, aspect, and mood just by how you conjugate the verbs, which in languages like English, when you conjugate a verb, or in Spanish where you conjugate a verb, you're not really hinting at the mood. You're hinting at who you're talking about or who you're talking to. Your tone is what impacts the mood. But in these languages, depending on how you say a verb, you're talking about where it took place, when it took place, or who you're talking to. You don't really indicate how you feel about a subject here. And these are also Semitic languages that have unique scripts. So we see that these letters represent consonants, and vowels are actually just inferred by the reader of the script. So reading the script here, there's no vowels in them. These are just consonants here. And you're supposed to just infer the vowels when you're reading that. So very interesting here. And we can see here that it's found in both Asia and Africa, predominantly Northern Africa, and then the Middle East, because Arabic is one of the prominent languages. We see that a lot in the Middle East as well. Egyptian, that's found in Egypt. That's a very, very old language as well. We can see here with the different language branches here, like the Semitic languages are found a lot in Northern Africa and the Middle East. But we have the Chadic languages found more in Northern Nigeria and Southern Niger. Now let's talk about language diffusion. We talked about our language families here, and yeah, that's our language families. There's a lot more language families. Those aren't the only ones, but those are the ones we're going to talk about for this course. So we're talking about how language spreads and the effects of language spread. So we look at relocation diffusion. For example, Spanish spread to Latin America during European colonization. French went to Africa during colonization. English went to Africa, India, Australia, North America because of colonization. We look at hierarchical diffusion, where English has become dominant in former British colonies due to the adoption by elites and government institutions. They put this language into the education system. High top businesses speak English as well. Celebrities speak English. English is seen as a status symbol. There's a lot of reasons why English is very prominent in former colonies, because it's widely used by these top authorities and institutions within these countries. We look at contagious diffusion, where the spread of different slang or phrases through social media platforms have become very popular. Words like sigma or skibbity, which I cannot stand hearing or saying. We can look at stimulus diffusion through the adoption of the Latin alphabet by many languages. That's why a lot of Indo-European languages are very similar, because they've adopted the Latin alphabet to fit their unique sounds. So, for example, Turkish replaced the Ottoman script and adapted this Latin alphabet, and it's similar to a lot of other Indo-European languages. Look at reverse hierarchical diffusion. The Maori language in New Zealand gained traction in smaller communities and later became an official language supported by national policies in urban centers. And New Zealand is putting in a lot of effort to preserve this language and maintain its prominence and usage within the country. Look at an FRQ from a few years ago. It's an FRQ that I had to answer in my AP exam. Explain one reason for why the difference in the percentage of English speakers in the Netherlands compared with the percentage in China. And they gave a chart with this. You don't need the chart to know that the Netherlands probably speaks a lot more English than China does. For one, there are entire different language families. So let's look at some different responses here to answer this FRQ. So as a Germanic language, English has close linguistic ties with Dutch. A lot of people probably said Indo-European language, and I don't know if that would have applied or not on this AP exam. They probably want something a little bit more specific here. But continuing on, English is not related to Chinese languages like Mandarin or Cantonese or Shanghainese. Dutch schools require foreign language learning from primary school onward, and English language competency is required to graduate from high school. That is true. This requirement does not exist in China, at least at the national level here. And we're talking about a national level concept here, so you have to be thinking of what's happening at a national level here, a national scale. That's the word we use in this course. Education levels in the Netherlands tend to be higher than they do throughout China overall, as being bilingual is a priority in the Netherlands, not in China. By having a large percentage of English speakers, the level of development in the Netherlands tends to be higher than that of China, so it's seen as a lot more promotive by the Netherlands than in China. There's more exposure to English in the Netherlands than in China because the Netherlands is part of the European Union, which uses English constantly for interaction, communication, trade, that sort of thing. Since the end of the Second World War, Dutch education policymakers have emphasized English over German, which is true. In China, English language education began to gain popularity in the late 20th century. So this happened later. So the Dutch have had more time to learn English. Because the Netherlands has a comparatively small population, the Dutch view English as an important tool to build cultural and business relationships. In China, which has a very, very, very large population, over 1 billion people, Mandarin is the dominant language. There's not really a need to have another official language or learned language. English, closely related to Dutch with the same alphabet, it's kind of go back to that first bullet point here, is comparatively much easier for Dutch to learn than it is for Chinese speakers to learn, because as we know, Chinese is Sino-Tibetan. It's not Indo-European. So there's going to be very much zero similarities between the two languages. So it's going to be a lot easier for someone who speaks an Indo-European language, or particularly a Germanic language, to learn English if they're Dutch over being Chinese. So what are some just takeaways and basic things to know here? There are around 7,000 languages globally, grouped into about 100 different language families. We went through maybe 6 or 7. The largest is Indo-European and spoken by nearly half the world's population here. And that second sentence here is kind of a point that might be on your AP exam, or at least on your test, is just what's the largest language family, and that's Indo-European. Languages within the same family often share cognates, which are words with similar origins and meaning. Remember, when we talk about the definition of a language family, we're talking about a group of languages that have this same common ancestor/origin. The word for mother in English is similar to the word in German, which is Mutter, or madre, which is in Spanish, and that reflects those Indo-European roots. Languages evolve and split over time due to geographic isolation or cultural changes, and that leads to the formation of new branches and groups. Latin diverged from the Romance languages, so you think of Spanish, French, Italian, trying to think of Portuguese, Romanian, I'm just looking at the chart here. All those Romance languages is what caused Latin to diverge. And some languages, called language isolates, have no known relatives. We can't really group them anywhere. So Basque is a language that's a language isolate because it has no known linguistic relatives and predates the arrival of Indo-European languages in Europe. So what that means is the Basque language was there before Indo-European languages were there in Europe, but we don't really know if there's any relatives to the Basque language, or if it just sprung up out of nowhere. Some families are geographically connected, though. For example, Sino-Tibetan is predominantly found in East Asia, while others are more widespread. This is usually due to colonization or trade, and we look at that with the Indo-European language family. The Afroasiatic language family, as well, is due to a lot of trade and colonization and conflict and unification and fragmentation. A lot of history as well with that language family. About 40% of the world's languages are endangered, and these are languages that are really, really not spoken at all. They come from smaller families, or they're indigenous languages, or maybe Creole languages. And so there's a lot of preservation efforts out there right now to try to preserve as many of these languages as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really does help me out, and it costs $0. I have some free resources for you in the description down below if you'd like to use them. If you have any AP Human Geography related questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to leave a comment down below the video or send me a message on Discord. I'll see you guys in the next video, though. Adios.